Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well this Thursday. Um, so I'm doing a late live broadcast today because my kids went to take your child to work day with my husband. So we were off doing that this morning, as were many, probably some of you, maybe you doing that today too. I think it's a nationwide thing. Excuse me if I sound funny. I have a little hoarseness going on today, cold or something. Elena, hello. And if you guys pop in and you have questions, feel free to type those in and I will try to address them. And Anne is here. Good. Thank you for joining. That's great. It's always fun when we actually have people watching and I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about anxiety in children. And I'll just preface this by saying I am not an expert on this. I am still researching actually myself resources and things on this topic because I think it is such an important topic. And so I don't have all the answers, but I really want to delve into this, and we may do more than one discussion about this because I think it's such an important topic. The reason I kind of got started thinking about this was I was having dinner with some friends and we started talking about our struggles as mothers and what we're going through with our kids, and several of us have seen this in our kids, anxiety and worry, and we were concerned about it for our own kids. But then we started chatting about why is this so common today in kids? Like, what's going on with society that anxiety is such a prevalent issue for so many kids? And I don't know the stats offhand, but I know it's a very common issue. So if your kid struggles with anxiety, you know that you're not alone, that this is becoming a real issue for many kids. So like I said, I don't have all the answers. This stuff is all new to me as well in some ways. And we know that there's a genetic component in many cases to anxiety and depression. So that's sort of always underlying, I think, to be aware of, that it can be genetic and it can be environmental as well. And those two always interact usually. But I did a little digging in the research to try to uncover, are there certain larger societal trends that might be influencing anxiety in our kids? And I'm going to talk about two today, and I'm sure there's many others, as most of these issues, it's a multifaceted problem. So I'm going to go over a couple ideas of why this might be so prevalent, and then if you have questions, or I can point to some resources that I have found helpful, and we'll just go from there. So one idea that was common in the research and the articles I read was this idea of, in our culture today, we're focusing a lot more on extrinsic goals and extrinsic motivation, I guess, than in the past, where in the past it may have been more intrinsically focused. So for instance, most of you get the distinction, but extrinsic goals would be where you're evaluated, right, from some sort of external source. So kid takes a test, they're evaluated by a teacher, or even on a sports team, they're evaluated by a coach or other players even. So there's a lot of that in our culture right now. If you think about what your kid experiences in an average day, if they're in public school or traditional school, if they're involved in any sort of extracurricular activities, sports or otherwise, even music, anything like that, there's at some level some sort of extrinsic evaluation going on at some level. And that may not be real apparent or very forceful, I guess you could say, but at school there's tests, there's a lot more standardized testing than there used to be, some of which is pretty high stakes at certain grade levels. Sports have gotten more high stakes. Many kids that I have seen that are in sports, and even my own son, it's a little more evaluation involved or competition than just going out and playing ball on the field with your friends, right? It gets to be a little bit more high stakes at certain levels. And a lot of times you're paying a lot of money to allow your kids to play that sport. And so it's even more kind of high pressure. So at all these levels, there's this evaluation from an external source, right? And even in larger culture, now that we have social media, there's this underlying kind of competitive, at least in certain places, feeling about if someone posts a picture of their fabulous Disney vacation, well, there's like this comparison thing going on, right? Underlying. And there's been a lot of talk about this in recent years, about this sort of underlying comparison that happens on social media. Hi, Shelley. Hi, Megan. Hop in if you have questions. I'm sorry about my voice. So all throughout society, we're seeing more of this external, extrinsic goal setting and motivation, I guess, extrinsic motivation. And when, as a kid, you can see why that would be anxiety provoking, right? Because everywhere you are in your life, you feel like someone's evaluating you. And so as an adult, we get some of that, but we're kind of more used to it, I think, and we're more mature. But it can get to adults as too, but but as a kid, you don't have the cognitive tools to deal with that comparison and that people evaluating you so much at the time that it can get very overwhelming for kids. And so you can see why that could cause anxiety. And so this research that I looked into, this was one of the big issues they talked about. And I had not actually even considered this before I read this research, but I think it's fascinating to think about, and a little sad to think about how much of our kids' lives and even our own lives is focused on these external things and sort of meeting these external standards, right? And that is very anxiety provoking, or can be for some kids. So that's one issue that came up in the research, was extrinsic motivation, extrinsic goals. So the opposite of that would be intrinsic, of course, which would be more of focusing on the qualities of the person themselves, right? So, and this is really hard to help kids focus on. And even for us grownups, I think it's hard, to focus on not the grade necessarily that you get on the test, but are you a kind person? Are you a good friend? Those are the things that I think kids should really be focusing on more, and could help, I think, alleviate some of the anxiety if it's done in a way that's not, pressure. You don't want to have pressure to be kind or whatever like that, but focusing more on the intrinsic qualities of the person, I think, is what we're trying to get back to, and what in decades past has been more of the primary motivator for a lot of people. And we've had this shift to more external goals and external motivation. So that's something good to think about as your kids experience these different forms of evaluation. How can you help them through that and give them tools to deal with that? And even yesterday, I thought of this. My son came in, he's doing baseball this time of year. And it's not a super competitive league. It's just a little league. It's pretty laid back. But he came in and he was distraught because all the boys on his team were comparing each other as to who was the best player. Now, this is common, right? This is what kids do. But it is sort of sad. And he is the one that's prone to more anxiety. And it got to him. I mean, he kind of had a breakdown. And I've talked to him before about trying to stay in your own lane, in the sense of focus on, improving your own game. Don't compare yourself too much to other people. Just be a good contributor to the team and all that stuff. But it is very challenging for kids, especially if they're competitive, and my son is, but he's also very sensitive. And I know a lot of kids are like this, where, that competition and that sense of not feeling like you're good enough compared to someone else can be very anxiety provoking, and it is hard. And it's not, our role as parents, I don't think, to shield them from everything that's competitive, right? They're going to face that, and we have to work with them to help them have the tools to cope with that. And so that's what we worked with our son about, trying not to get so caught up in the who's first, who's best, who's the best hitter, all this stuff, but focusing on your own game and just improving the way that you can and working hard. And again, bringing it back to kind of that more intrinsic qualities of your own person, rather than it all being about the evaluation compared to someone else. And of course, sports and many other things inherently involve that, right? I mean, you can't have something where everybody gets a trophy and everybody gets first place, right? We know that. That's not going to be helpful either. But I think there does have to be kind of a fine line between everything being about evaluation versus just focusing on your own progress and your own skills and what can you bring to the table kind of idea. So that's one piece of this anxiety issue. The other thing that the research points to, and several articles I read pointed to, was the decline of free play, unstructured play. And this is one of the main reasons I started this group, Parenting Against the Grain, is because I feel so strongly about the fact that we have got to bring play back as the main thing that kids do. And unstructured play, there's nothing wrong with sports and activities, and there's a place for that, but unstructured play, and research shows this over and over again, is where kids really build these skills that they need for the rest of their lives. They feel more competent. They feel like they have more control over their lives. They get to run the show, basically. When they're doing unstructured play with their friends and they're just playing some game on the playground, or they're come up with something of their own devising, this is, to me, kind of where the magic happens. This is where they work out their own rules. If someone is being treated unfairly, oftentimes they will come together and come up with some solution to solve that issue. And it seems like a minor thing to us, maybe, but those skills are really crucial. If they don't have that time to just be in control of themselves and figure things out for themselves, and if you have a problem, you get together with your friends and figure out what the solution is, or even just coming up with your own game is part of the process, right? You get a bunch of kids together and there's no agenda. It's all up to them. If they're going to play groundies on the playground, if they're going to play catch, they get to decide. And there's really something beautiful about that when you see it happen. And I've seen this happen on the playground in our neighborhood, where there'll just be a bunch of kids out there hanging out, and someone will say, hey, you want to play groundies? And, this to me is sort of a cultural phenomenon. I don't know where groundies started. I'm sure all of you know about groundies, but all kids know how to play it from the time they're like 4 years old, right? And so they come up with their own rules. And those rules have been sort of passed down from kid to kid, and they all know that you don't do this and you don't do that. And then if there's an issue, or like if there's a younger kid playing that doesn't understand all the rules, they come up with some way to include that child that's younger to where it's fair. And I've seen this happen, and it's so cool that we have kids that are, 12, maybe 13 years old, and they'll play with a 5 or 6 year old, and they'll somehow work out a solution to where that little kid can play with the bigger kids. So it can happen. Those are the kinds of things that unstructured play can teach a child about devising your own solution, being in control of the situation. There's no grown-up there monitoring and telling them what to do and say, hey, you need to let that little kid play. They just figure it out. They're like, okay, you want to play? We'll figure this out. And they work it out. And it seems so minor to us and like it's not a big thing, but that stuff really does build skills. And it's crucial to having those skills developed as they get older. So in terms of anxiety, unstructured play to me is sort of the antidote to anxiety in some senses. Now, it's not going to cure everything, but as we have seen a decline in unstructured play and how kids are so many hours of the day in situations that are controlled completely by adults, they don't feel that self-confidence, that competence, that being in control of their own situation. And so as that goes down, then the anxiety creeps in because they begin to feel like they're not competent in areas of their life. And so that is that connection between anxiety and what we've seen, the decline in unstructured play. And there's tons of research on that. And Peter Gray, I don't know if some of you are probably familiar with him. He's probably the leader in the research on play and its relation to mental health and the role that it plays in childhood. So if you have not read anything by Peter Gray, he is an awesome resource to read about. I think he even has a really good TED Talk. I can put the link in here for that. He's a really great resource for learning about that. Okay, so those two factors, focus on extrinsic goals. That's a shift that we've seen culturally, and the decline in unstructured play. Those are the two issues that I wanted to talk about that we see as being contributing to why kids tend to be more anxious as compared to previous decades. So those are the two issues I wanted to talk about. If anybody has questions, you can pop in. I'll try my best to address them. But the other thing I wanted to mention was, I don't know if you saw the post, I think I did one yesterday, about this positive parenting conference that's coming up. There's going to be a whole masterclass on anxiety, and I was so excited that they put that in there this year. It's a free conference. It's online. You just register and they send you the link to the video. And these are top-notch authors that are specialists in each of, so they do, there's one is on anxiety. They have one on parenting teenagers. They have, I think there's 10 or 12 different speakers, all focusing on different topics, but one is anxiety in children. And I just watched the little blurb, the preview, and I can put it in here as well. And it looks like it's going to be really good. And I think it's going to be a great resource for all of us, because I know I need to watch it for my own situation and my own kids. If you're just hopping on, or if you just hopped on in the last few minutes, I was talking about anxiety in kids and why it's more prevalent. But I also did say at the beginning that I don't have all the answers. I am researching this myself because my own kids have experienced this, especially my older one. And so we're all in this together, trying to figure out how we can support our kids and what we can do to help them deal with anxiety. The one thing that this author did talk about, and I have heard this come up multiple times in the resources that I have looked into, is the idea that we can help provide our kids with tools, cognitive tools, to cope with these anxious feelings. But one thing that we probably shouldn't do, and this I've heard over and over again, is immediately try to take the anxiety-provoking thing, whatever it is, away. And this is something that I had not really considered before, but I think is really important to understand the distinction. And this author was talking about this, who's going to be the speaker, so this is why I want to watch the full talk. But there's new treatments that are addressing this as well, and I just read an article about that. But the whole idea being, we can give them tools to work through the anxiety and understand what their body's doing when they feel anxious and get through it. But we don't always want to just remove the anxiety-provoking event. So, for instance, if your child gets anxious when they are about to go to a big event, like a big birthday party that's crowded or a big school event that's crowded, it's usually not the best strategy to just say, okay, you don't have to go. We just remove that thing that's causing the anxiety. And yes, the child feels much better. You feel much better because they're not getting worried about this event, but they don't have any skills for when that comes up again. And so this is what makes it really hard to be a parent sometimes, because it is our instinct to just take away the thing that is causing pain. And I have done this with my own kids, and I, sometimes even I know in the situation that I probably should not be doing that, but it comes up all the time. They're nervous about going to the dentist. You can't just cancel the dentist appointment, so you have to work through it. And same thing, like my older son, when he was, I think he was about 7, it was a couple of years ago now, we, signed up and got in line to get our flu shots, and he panicked. I mean, he was 7 or 8 and he backed himself into a corner and was just about to have a panic attack. And, some people probably would just say, okay, we're leaving. We're not getting a shot. Just sorry. If we get the flu, we're, but we pushed through, and I tried to help him with, breathing strategies and how do we cope with this? And we talked about it beforehand, but he still got so worried about it. But once he got through it, and, the nurse just swooped in there real quick and gave him the shot, it wasn't very fun, but then the next year he was so much better because he had gone through that and dealt with the anxiety of getting a shot. And, that's a simple example, right? There's a lot more to it and a lot of situations that are more complicated, but that is kind of something to keep in the back of our minds. I think it's hard being a parent in those situations when you want to rescue them from the situation, but everything I've been reading and all this new therapies that are coming out are talking about helping kids through the anxiety so they build the skills to cope with it in the future. And so that's what we're going to hopefully learn more about with this speaker. It's coming up first part of May. I'll put the link in here, but like I said, I think we're all in this together, and if anyone has questions, I'll scroll down here. But otherwise, I'm going to sign off for now, and I'm hopefully going to talk about this some more because I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with and their kids struggle with. So if you think of questions later, drop them in the group or email me, and we can hopefully have some really good resources to help all of us through this tricky topic of anxiety. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.